Hello, BookTube. Right, we're going to continue with DuneTube 2019. This is an event that I'm doing with a bunch of other great booktubers in which we read one Frank Herbert Dune novel every month from July until December. And in August, we'll be doing the second book in what is now called the Dune Chronicles, Dune Messiah. This is the new ace paperback, lovely new ace paperback that they made of all the Dune books, as far as I know. And unlike my co-hosts for DuneTube, I will not be doing just one video on the third week of the month. Although you should watch for theirs, because their videos on Dune were great. But I will also be doing just ordinary read-alongs. I want to take you through the nuts and bolts of these books rather than just an overview. And when it comes to Dune Messiah, the second book, the direct sequel to Dune, we run into a lot of problems. And they're pretty obvious right away. Because Dune Messiah is typically the stumbling block for people reading the Dune books. They read Dune, and they're blown away. Dune is incredible. Dune is amazing. It's also operatic. It takes place on a huge scale. It has very human elements. I think that Herbert very skillfully brings us back down to the human many, many times throughout the book. It's specific human grief that causes one man to betray House Atreides. It's specific human courage that saves Paul Atreides and his mother in the desert. It's a specific human tragedy, if you want to call it that awakens Paul's sister Aaliyah in his mother's womb, not only to adulthood, but to 1,000 adulthoods. And it's also the story at the end, the massive climax where Paul and his Fremen allies unseat the emperor of this galactic empire and seize power themselves. That moment is counterbalanced with an extremely human moment where Paul has a knife fight with another young man, and no one around is the whole of the Imperium is watching. No one is going to interfere. He has to live through that fight on his own. But the parts of Dune that people tend to remember are the big operatic space opera parts, the big special effects parts that command the budget in any movie adaptation. Back when Dune first appeared, I think readers were thinking, well, if there is a sequel to this, we'll get more of that. And that's what we want. We want more of that. We want more of the epic story of Dune and its massive sandworms. And they didn't get it with this book at all. And that was an odd hop, and it caught everybody by surprise. And something of that has just lapped outwards in the reception of this book ever since. But anyway, for those of you who are maybe joining us a little late or lagging behind, the story that was told in Dune starts out as one of warfare between royal houses in a far future galactic empire, in which the Emperor has ordered that House Harkonnen, which oversees the planet Dune, and extracts from Dune the most precious resource anywhere in the galaxy, the spice melange, which is extremely addictive, but it prolongs life, and it accentuates certain psychic powers, including the psychic powers of the Spacing Guild, who use those powers to plot pathways for their ships, which are traveling so fast that if you didn't have prescience, if you couldn't foresee, if you couldn't look down a timeline and see that this path was free of danger, spaceflight would be impossible. And the Spacing Guild is extremely important. There is no empire without it. There is no anything without it. No warfare, no smuggling, no weather control, no nothing, without ships to take men and equipment from planet to planet. But also the society of super nuns, the Bene Gesserit, they also use the spice for many, many of their exotic physical and mental techniques. And Dune is the only place where you can get it. Spice grows spice is harvested from the endless sands of Dune, and zealously guarded by giant sandworms that will destroy a whole spice mining factory in one gulp if you let them. The Emperor has ordered House Harkonnen to leave Dune, and has ordered House Atreides, headquartered on the water world of Caladan, to move to Dune and take it over. On the surface, this seems like a cumbersome but fairly routine whim of the Imperial machinery, but underneath it quickly becomes obvious in the course of the novel Dune that this is an attempt on the Emperor's part and on the House Harkonnen's part to eradicate House Atreides. The Harkonnens hate the Atreides and have for generations. And the Emperor hates the Atreides because on the Distaff side, the Atreides are related to the Imperial House, and the Duke Leto Atreides is far more popular than the Emperor. And the Duke knows that he's walking into a trap. He knows that he's taking his family into a trap, and all of his faithful retainers, including his minstrel swordsman, Gurney Halleck, his assassin Mentat, Thufir Hawat, and also his Bravo commander, Duncan Idaho. He knows that he's taking all of these people into a trap. But he's determined to make the best of it. He's determined to use the incalculable riches of the spice trade and also the incredible harshness of the planet itself to sculpt a fighting force that will be the equal of the Emperor's elite Sardaukar legions, who are his strong arm. The fear of all noble houses is that the Emperor will turn on them and unleash Sardaukar, who are far more powerful than each house's legions of soldiers. Mainly because the Sardaukar are bred on a planet called Seleucia Secundus, which is incredibly harsh. Not as harsh as Dune. And the Duke Leto Atreides sees right away in that the potential to create a fighting force of his own that is every bit as formidable as the Sardaukar. In fact, in other words, Duke Leto doesn't consider this a death trap. He knows it's a trap, but he plans to make the best of it. But he is betrayed. His house physician, Dr. Yua, betrays him. And he does it for his own personal reasons, and those reasons are thwarted. He wants to kill Baron Harkonnen. Baron Harkonnen lives. And it all but destroys our cast of heroes. The Duke dies. Gurney Halleck and Duncan Idaho are cast to the winds. Thufir Hawat is co-opted by the Harkonnens. They don't co-opt his loyalty, but they co-opt him physically. He is a mentat. He is the human equivalent of a computing machine, and they use him for that while he plots revenge. And Paul and Jessica are supposed to be given to a gigantic storm in the desert, but they survive. And they ensconce themselves with the Fremen, wild desert warriors who populate the deep deserts of Dune, and gain the loyalty of the Fremen. And eventually, the Lady Jessica, Paul's mother, becomes their Reverend Mother by undergoing what's called the spice agony, where she is given raw melange, raw spice. And it triggers all sorts of bodily reactions in her, all sorts of psychic reactions in her, and makes her a Reverend Mother, a super nun. Unfortunately, she undergoes the spice agony while she's pregnant with Duke Leto's daughter, Aaliyah. And when the Lady Jessica, in the spice agony, has her previous memories, all of the cellular memories that are imprinted in her DNA, awakened into conscious recall, the same thing happens with her fetus, with her little daughter. So before Aaliyah is even born, she has the memory of 1,000 old Bene Gesserit Reverend Mothers. An abomination is what the Bene Gesserit call such a thing. They have long-standing rules against it. Jessica really has no choice and tries to make the best of it. And Paul also undergoes the spice agony. And in that spice agony, he becomes what the Bene Gesserit have been planning and breeding for centuries. He becomes the Kwisatz Haderach, a man with all of the superpowers of a Reverend Mother, of a Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother. That, at least, is the Kwisatz Haderach on blueprints. But what the reality turns out to be even more than that, far more than that. Paul ceases to be, strictly speaking, human, and his prescience is off the charts. His ability to the same ability that the guild navigators have in a narrow sense, he has in an enormous sense, just enormous sense, effectively enough to make him sham at being all-knowing. He becomes Muad'Dib. He becomes not just a member in good standing of a warrior society like the Fremen, he becomes their religious leader, their god. And we can see that starting, even when he is a military commander, leading his Fremen on the backs of sandworms into battle to unseat the Emperor at the conclusion of Dune, and ascend to the throne himself by marrying the Emperor's daughter, Princess Irulan. He will not have a child with Irulan. She will not be his real wife. His real wife will be Chani, a woman of the Fremen. She will be his heart. She will be in his bedroom. He will marry Princess Irulan for state reasons, to give him a claim on the throne. And that is how Dune ends. A rousing, incredibly exciting ending. And then a little while passed, and readers started to wonder, is there going to be a sequel? I was not one of those readers. I thought that Dune made a great novel on its own. That feels like heresy for me to say because of all the enjoyment that I've got out of the sequels, but I would have been happy. I think that one of the weaknesses that science fiction and fantasy inherited from its pulp beginnings is sequelitis. I wish that weren't true. I wish that sequels were rare. I wish that series were rare, incredibly rare. I wish that instead these science fiction and fantasy writers, many of whom I have loved, I've loved their work, I wish that they would just create new worlds with each book. Frank Herbert showed over and over again, a dozen times, how well he could do that with all of his non-Dune novels. He showed how well he could do that. I wish that, a part of me wishes that science fiction and fantasy didn't have that affliction, but they do. And so there was a sequel. There was Dune Messiah, which was serialized first, and that's a problem right there. that's a problem right there. Even in the pre-internet era, you don't want to give science fiction and fantasy fans blood. You don't want to give them little meals. They'll find things to hate. Give them a finished thing, and you'll be able to stand on your feet much better. But either way, the reaction to Dune Messiah at the time and ever since has been negative. It's much shorter than any other Dune novel, and people who read these books for the first time tend to, if they read, for instance, the first three, Dune Messiah, and Children of Dune, they tend to come away parodying the exact same line. Leads me to think that it's not critically examined on the part of a lot of them. They tend to come away saying Dune was a masterpiece, Dune Messiah sucked, Children of Dune was okay, and all the other books stink. And everything is wrong about that. That statement is wrong on every level. Dune Messiah is not, in fact, a misstep. It is not, in fact, a disappointment. It's just a book told in a radically different voice than the epic tone of the first book. That is totally the author's prerogative. If Frank Herbert wants to write a book in a totally different voice than his previous book, he's totally allowed to do that. The judgment, such as there is of judgment, will be on whether or not he does it well, not whether or not he does it at all. And the more I have reread Dune Messiah, I'm rereading it for this read-along, and we're doing 80 pages a week in August. The books Dune Messiah isn't really helpfully chaptered, so we're reading roughly the first 80 pages. In fact, let me tell you, we're reading this time around all the way to the chapter that starts with Aliyah peered down from her spy window into the great reception hall to watch the advance of the guild entourage. And on my Ace edition, that's page 86. So we will go to, let's do this now. We will go to, on my Ace paperback, we'll go to page 180. The chapter that starts, as he lay immersed in the screaming odor of the spice, staring inward through the oracular trance, Paul saw the moon become an elongated sphere. That will be the chapter that we end with next time. This time around, we're ending on roughly chapter 86, or roughly page 86, something like that. And right away, as this book starts, we see that we are in a completely different world than Dune. We are still in the same world. We are still in the world of Arrakis, of the desert planet, of Dune, of the spice melange. We're still in a world in which Paul Atreides is emperor, and has Chani by his side, and has Princess Irulan at his counselor table. He also has the Fremen Naib Stilgar, who we meet in the first book, and who was one of his lead warriors in the first book. Stilgar is, in many ways, the voice and embodiment of the old world of the Fremen. And Lady Jessica will make her appearance. She doesn't in the first 80 pages that we're reading today, but she will make her appearance in later Dune books. And another character will too. Another character is going to make his appearance in a way in this book. He hasn't yet. He doesn't in the first 80 pages, although he is mentioned. And that character is a Ghola named Hayt, Hayt. And a Ghola, you can substitute a kind of clone. And Hayt is a clone of Duncan Idaho, the swordsmaster who dies defending Paul and Jessica's retreat in Dune. We are told, early on in the pages that we're reading today, imagine a hypothetical in which an enterprising Sardaukar commander knew who it was that his men were cutting down, and sent the preserved body to Tleilax, to the planet Tleilax, in order for them to preserve the culture and culture the cells and make a Ghola of that person. Imagine if that Sardaukar had enough thought fast enough on his feet and had the body preserved fast enough.
then this Gola would be a physical remnant of Paul Atreides' boyhood friend, of one of his most beloved mentors. But in the first 80 pages, we don't meet that Gola yet, and we don't see Lady Jessica. The purpose of these first 80 pages that you read in Dune Messiah is to set the stage. About 15 years have passed since the end of Dune, and a lot has changed. And Frank Herbert, I think, wisely understands that if he doesn't ground you thoroughly in that, you'll be lost for the stories that he wants to tell. He does not want to tell the stories involved in the immediate aftermath of Dune. He does not want to tell the story of Paul Atreides marrying Princess Irulan in a ceremony. He does not want to tell the story of the old emperor being, rusticated on Seleucia Secundus with one toy legion. He does not want to tell the story of what the Fremen do in their religious zeal about Muad'Dib. He does not want to tell that story as it's happening. Instead, he makes the decision to move the narrative ahead in time, over a dozen years. So the baby Alia, who was an abomination in her mother's womb, is now on the cusp of young womanhood. A lot of the characters that we knew in the earlier book are still around. Keep in mind, Melange prolongs life. And the thing that I think gave this book the poor reception that it got is that, crucially, at the center of the story, Paul Atreides himself is bitter. He is bitter. He has seen what the Fremen have done in his name. Legions of Fremen, millions of warriors who are, as we know, unbeatable. The best warriors in the universe didn't beat them in Dune, and no one else has a chance. They launch what is called in this book, in a way that is innocent for the time. This is written long, long before the rise of ISIL or 9/11. It's called a jihad. The Fremen embark on a jihad across the galaxy, bringing bloodshed and the sword and the cult of Muad'Dib to hundreds of planets, all in Muad'Dib's name. And this makes of Paul, by the time we meet him in this book, not only an emperor, but a religious leader, a cult leader. In the streets of the royal city of Arakeen, pilgrims come every day in endless numbers to chant and make obeisance and pray in the name of Muad'Dib. And as Paul notes himself in the pages that we're reading today, whatever they're looking for, they find it. They go away satisfied. He doesn't understand it, and it has made him bitter. The infighting, the paperwork, the matters serious and dire that Stilgar brings to the council meetings, all of this is not anything that Paul really wanted to do. And he's doing it for a reason. And the reason is hinted at a few times in Dune, and it's hinted at a few times in the pages that we're reading today. Those hints get a little louder and a little louder as things go on. There is a terrible thing that Paul Atreides foresees with his spice-induced prescience, and that he's trying to avoid or defang. And readers who know the whole story of Dune will know what that thing is. But I don't think myself that when Herbert was writing these books, he himself knew. I think he was feeling along and trying to come up with a way that he could keep the character of Paul Atreides a hero, even though he is also the leader of legions who are bloodthirsty and who are indicted for murder on the first page of this book. And we get a very different Paul in these pages. Just one moment here. Alia mentions in council that no one has any desire to kill enemies of the Atreides race. She says there's enough butchery going on under the Atreides banner. And Paul thinks she feels it too, Paul thought. Strange what a sense of compelling responsibility they both felt for that brawling, idolatrous universe with its ecstasies of tranquility and wild motion. Must we protect them from themselves, he wondered? They play with nothingness every moment. Empty lives, empty words. They ask too much of me. His throat felt tight and full. How many moments would he lose? What sons? What dreams? Was it worth the price his vision had revealed? Who would ask the living on some far distant future? Who would say to them, but for Muad'Dib, you would not be here? Think about that for a minute. If we're fresh from reading Dune, think about that moment when the same character, Paul Atreides, says a line like, they ask too much of me. That's a character who has fundamentally changed. Not through ineptitude of the author, but through very intentional intent of the author. This is what would happen to Paul Atreides
if he was trapped in his own ability to foresee the results of his actions and yet had no way out. We would come, if that character was written correctly and with a sense of empathy, we would come to the character that we meet in this book. Self-pitying, bitter, abrupt, even tyrannical. That's what struck Dune readers wrong about this book. They couldn't swallow it coming so soon after the open heroism at the end of Dune, the novel. To encounter this, to encounter the real politics side, to encounter... the essential story of Dune is that a wronged insurgent prince surges back and claims everything. That's a great and optimistic story, and we think we know how that story ends. And this is not the ending that those readers had in mind. And that is what we're reading today. The first 80 pages of this book that we're reading today are mostly setup. The one tiny thread of plot that we get in these pages that could have been handled in one paragraph. And keep in mind, Frank Herbert could have handled that in one paragraph. Writers don't get any more skillful than this one. The fact that he didn't means he didn't want to. It means he had other reasons in mind. We must not criticize the book for ineptitude. I always lose patience when I hear people do that. I criticize it for anything else than that. But the one little nugget of plot that we have here is literally a plot. There is a plot afoot, a conspiracy among the designates of the Guild, designates of Bene Telaxu, designates of the Bene Gesserit, to do something, to attack Paul Atreides in some way. And that plot, when we are taken directly into its deliberations by its members, and we learn that Princess Irulan has been secretly supplying Chani's food with a contraceptive to make sure that she does not bear an heir, and to increase the pressure on Paul to have an heir with Princess Irulan, because what's the good of being an emperor if you don't have an heir? That is a two-pronged kind of plot. One is that Princess Irulan is taking direct measures to make sure that Chani does not become pregnant. And two, there is a plot unfolding against Muad'Dib, and the reason that the plot is able to happen at all, considering that this is a person whose prescience is so powerful that he can foresee anything anywhere, the reason that it can unfold at all is because there's a guild navigator involved in the plot. And it turns out that the guild navigator's ability to foresee a narrow part of the future negates Paul Atreides' ability to foresee what that guild navigator is doing or anyone is doing in his ambit. The guild navigator is the cloak under which the conspiracy can happen. At least we think. No one is completely sure of the limits of Paul and Alia's prescience. They themselves are a little vague on the subject, but that is the beginning of a plot in these pages. But really, in these first 80 pages, what we get is recapitulation and also a brushstroke portrait of this new world. 15 years have passed. There's a new world. It's not the world immediately at the end of Dune. Massive things have happened. And I think those things combine to make people disappointed with this book. And I would urge you, if you're reading this for the first time, to go in forewarned. That this is not meant to be a next moment continuation of Dune. This is another chapter way down the line in events like that. You should allow it to breathe and be that before you come down on it. But those are the first 80 pages that we're reading today of DuneTube. We're reading Dune Messiah in the month of August. So next week we'll read the next 80 pages, roughly speaking. And we'll talk about them there. And things do pick up. I mean, this is not a book that has no plot. This is not a book that has no action. So things do pick up. We'll discuss them next week. But from you, mainly today, what I want is the question that I have asked a million people about this book. How jarring did you find that change? Not only in time, but also in perspective and especially tone. This is a bitter toned book. It doesn't have an epic register like its predecessor, and I'm wondering how badly that threw you, if it threw you at all. So let me know in the comments field all that you think about this, and we will reconvene next week to talk about the next 80 pages of Dune Messiah. Thank you, BookTube.